I want other people to be better for the time they spent with me. And I really do believe if they are better for the time they've spent with me, the business that I have them working for is going to be better. My privately held little business will be more profitable because they're growing as a person and as a leader. So I want it to be about them and not me as much as possible. I think if you and I do a good job as leaders, at times we can be invisible. Other people are getting to celebrate their successes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur, or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the show. Very excited for this week's guest, Dr. Andy Neillie. Dr. Andy is an entrepreneur, business owner, leadership coach, a passion for cultivating strong, resilient teams, the founder of the Neillie Leadership Group, and he also has an ebook, 3 Imperative Leadership Conversations, which we'll get into a little bit and make sure we help you out in finding that later in the episode. But before we go there, Dr. Andy, just tell me a little bit more about your story, your background, kind of what shaped who you are today.
I became a Christian early in my life, and I'm reading the biographies about this wonderful servant leader. And then it wasn't even my career. It was like pre-career jobs. I'm working in construction as I go through high school and college for a couple of really bad bosses, Phil. One of the guys, he had an anger management issue. So I'm reading about this servant leader, but I'm working for people that are just bad bosses. And at some level, Phil, it awakened in me a passion around nobody should work for a bad boss. And that's kind of been in the back of my heart since a very early age. And then I've got a communication degree. People have told me that I have a way with words. I got into training. And in some respects, those two just kind of came together with the Neillie Leadership Group. At this point, I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles and have been traveling around the globe preaching the gospel of good leadership for 25 years, probably.
Well, we didn't talk about this before the episode, but man, talk about the best leader that has ever lived, right? So Jesus, and I think, what's amazing is the perfect example of like the leaders we can try to become in a servant leader. But first of all, let's talk about bad bosses. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Like, so you had some bad bosses, but like maybe, what is a bad boss?
Yeah. I mean, well, the unfortunate reality is, I think a lot of us, some of your small business leaders listening in, I mean, I wrote a blog a number of years ago called "Sometimes the Best Mentors Are Our Anti-Mentors," and we see demonstrated, lack of anger management. I can clearly remember the day the guy picked up the stapler for the paper package from these job sites and opened it up and proceeded to hit me 4 times with an open stapler. And I just thought, this guy can't control his own anger. People that make it about themselves, people that don't, if we define good leadership as, are the people better for the time they've been under your influence, then it's real easy to recognize, Phil, part of my crusade in the 2020s is celebrity influencers are not really influencers at all. Just because you can put up a TikTok and get 10,000 followers doesn't mean you have anything to say or improve the world around you. So you and I both understand the best leaders, they're at the bottom of the pyramid rather than at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And anybody that is self-serving and dishonest and disingenuous and seeking their own, they might be in a position of management, but they're not really what you and I would call high-performing leaders.
Yeah. So let's go back. So you're in different roles. You're under some different bad bosses, as you said. You also have this reference of the best servant leader that's ever lived, and you're deciding I need to make some changes. So talk me through those changes in your career and how this evolved a little bit before we get into and we'll get into the strategy and tactics of being a good leader. But how did you talk me through the process for you a little bit? How you learned this?
Well, as I said, I wish I could say it was strategic. I'm a person of the head rather than the heart, probably. I finished up my undergraduate degree in broadcast journalism and headed to seminary, knowing that I love to teach and study. So I headed to theological graduate school, got my my master's degree from a Western seminary in Portland, Oregon, and ended up being a teacher and a coach for a number of years. And then I got into corporate training. In fact, Phil, again, nothing was strategic. My wife and I are talking one night late at night. She's in the printed edition of the Wall Street Journal when we still were getting that delivered to our home every day. And there was a little ad in the back said, are you a good speaker? Would you like to do corporate training? My wife said, Andy, this sounds like this fits for you. And I ended up doing training for one of these firms. So we used to get these flyers in the mail. Hey, come to a hotel and learn about conflict management, or come to a hotel and learn the 10 best practices of negotiations. I worked for one of those firms. As I started to speak more and more about what does good leadership look like, I transitioned from being a trainer with one of those firms to doing some of my own speeches and mainly workshop settings. Small businesses would bring me in to work with their team of managers. And that was really the beginning of Neillie Leadership Group. It was not strategic. It was not, hey, I'm going to set up a business and attract some funding and secure some clients. It really was not that. It was really me responding out of my passion for leadership. I'll never forget, I had just finished my doctorate, my dissertation studies on the personal side of leading well. I'm in a workshop at FedEx leading a coaching workshop, and one of their managers said, wow, Andy, I remember this quote, when the students are ready, the teacher will appear. I think you just taught us what we needed to learn about leadership. I don't know if I've really learned anything new. You know, you and I can chuckle about it, Phil. You get past Jesus, you get past the first couple centuries AD and the Stoicism. There's nothing new in leadership in the last 2,000 years. We all have our own different voice. Dr. Andy and his 4 leadership necessities, the 3 imperative leadership conversations. I have some packaging of good leadership that I bring to the marketplace. But it's, you know, the small business leaders that listen to your podcasts, that have small teams, you know, if they're working at being the type of leader you and I are talking about and not just managing for the bottom line, we all have learned some things together. And I've been privileged for the last 25 years to use my communication skills and write a couple of books on it. There's nothing strategic about it. Maybe I'm more purposeful these days than I was, but I think I kind of fell into it.
Yeah, I think you're pretty humble too. A couple of things there. First of all, just your story and the evolution of it, and like the Wall Street Journal, I think you said, and just you said it wasn't overly strategic, and I think, but you said you're just responding to a passion for leadership.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us, for you know, people like me, sometimes I try to be so strategic, and I just try to solve everything and plan everything, and like, oh, this is how this is going to go, and this is what it's going to become. We have no idea. Move in the direction. Just move in the direction that you're being nudged at, and then let the chips fall as they may, but just start to move in that direction. If you bring over faith in that too, you're going to get answers. You're going to get guided as you go, but just go, move in the direction. Good
for you. Good for you. In fact, as I talk about these 4 leadership necessities that in some respects have become my language around leadership development. The first one is conviction, and it's very much about strategy and passion, but Phil, I would echo with you. It sounds like guys like you, you're maybe wired to be more passionate about things than I am. But I've told any number of people, even if you're not a person of passion, put your hand to the plow and get invested in something you believe in. And that energy and that passion will grow. And in fact, if I can take a 3-minute side story, in addition to doing Neillie Leadership Group, Phil, my wife and I own 5 franchise swim schools, Aqua Tots, in Central Texas, where I live. I'm traveling to Orlando right now, but I live in Austin. 15 years ago, I was not passionate about childhood drowning, but a friend of mine who had founded Aqua Tots asked me to expand his brand to Texas. We brought it to Texas 15 years ago. Phil, the unfortunate bad news is I tracked childhood drownings. More than 100 little kids drowned in Texas last year. And the fact that our 5 swim schools did more than 200,000 swim lessons for our students over the last year. This is something I've become deeply passionate about. simply because I put my hand to the plow, like you talked about. Just work hard at something, and if it's a worthwhile cause, passion will grow. And
Right.
these days now, I've spoken for the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. I blog about leadership in this swim school space, and my team did 200,000 swim lessons last year. We've made a difference in Texas because passion has grown.
And you could have never had predicted that 20 whenever it was. You could have never predicted the direction to go, right?
Yeah.
You just keep moving. And honestly, I wonder if just what you did in your leadership and your coaching kind of like, how did that come about? Did it kind of just all of a sudden miraculously connect you to that in some way? Like it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and the miracle was a painful miracle. 2008 hit, and I got a phone call from one of my major clients, my major training clients. Phil, I lost $85,000 in one phone call because it was 2008, 2009, and external training and consulting and speaking. That's the first place companies contracted. So when my friend reached out and said, Andy, this swim business that you helped me start in the 90s that's grown and grown and grown, we're ready to expand it outside Arizona. Would you help us bring it to Texas? Phil, I had nothing else to do. I was sitting at home. My wife was sitting at home, and we just prayed and talked and prayed and talked and fought and argued and prayed and talked and took the last sum of money we had left to buy a franchise territory. I got recertified. I'm an old swimmer and lifeguard. I got recertified as a grown man. I'm doing swim lessons at hotels and apartments across Austin. My wife is helping out by doing marketing and sales, and it was nothing that we intended to do, but it was something that was in front of us that we could work hard at. And as you hear the passion in my voice today, 15 years later, I love what my team does. I haven't been in the water in years now. I certified all of my instructors underneath me, and they've gone on. But now I think my title is Director of Culture and Strategy. So I find the new locations where we can serve families, and then the very stuff you and I are talking about. How do I help our managers grow as leaders?
Well, so first of all, I want to come back to the leadership necessities and conviction, but the 75, I don't know if you said 75 or 78,000, so I apologize, but what a blessing that loss was, right? I mean, you lost all these engagements, all these commitments, and what a blessing that was, that it guided you to what you're doing with saving lives that you don't even know about, right? So I think for people that are going through challenging situations, adversity, you don't know what the lesson is yet. You don't know how this is a blessing yet. But if you can reframe it that and just trust that, because there's a plan, but you might not know the plan. So I think that story is really, really cool.
Yeah, and I have to say, in 2008, 2009, your phrase from a minute ago, what a blessing that loss was, it did not feel like a blessing at that time, right?
Sure it didn't.
And it's that story that you've told on many of your podcasts. Most overnight successes are, 10 years in the making. Well, for me, it's been 15. But I can look back now and say, thank you, Lord, that loss ended up being a blessing, and we've saved some lives in Texas.
Well, the other thing, because you talked about leadership hasn't changed for 2,000 years, and everybody can go back to Scripture. But I do think there's a lot of help that can be provided in the interpretation of it, especially for a guy like you, where I think you got to be careful and make sure it's truthful, but you can interpret things and study things and just provide that connection to people that aren't ready, or they don't know how to connect yet. Yeah. So I think for those of you that are like, do I just read the Bible to learn leadership, or do I read other things? Read both, read other things, because the interpretation of it can be helpful to accelerate your understanding.
Yeah.
At least that's been my thought process around this. I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah. Well, and that's really, I think, the articulation of the 4 leadership necessities that I talk about. Conviction, we've already covered. Competence, the ability to help your team execute and do things with excellence. Character, the whole piece around you'll never be a better leader than you are a person. And then covenant, this understandable but unwritten commitment you have to the people that you're influencing, that you're going to have a formal relationship, but you're also going to have a personal relationship with them. I mean, there's probably biblically chapter and verse for every one of those. Undoubtedly they are. But most of my work is not in churches or mission organizations or nonprofits. It's in the business marketplace, because when the leader of a sales team for a fuel and lubricant company in Texas gets better conviction and competence and character and covenant, he helps his team grow and they become a more successful fuel and lubricant company. That's been the story that I've been able to tell across the globe for 25 years.
I love this. So
There's a difference between a manager and a high performing leader.
Yeah.
They're not in opposition, but they're layered on.
Yeah. There's a leadership coach that I interviewed, amazing individual, Tim Kite, founded Focus 3. I interviewed him about a little over a year ago. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple months later. But one of the things that he taught us, and he was very founded in principles from 2,000 years ago, I'll say that. And one of the things he taught was that to build trust, there's 3 elements of trust: character, competence, and connection, which you talk a lot about covenant and people. But how true is it that, regardless of which words you want to use, if you want to build a leader, if you want to become a good leader, you need to build trust, and and then you also need to have a plan and being convicted on what you're doing as well, which I like adding that to it. But just kind of reaffirms what you're saying there, and I love those four. Well, and here's the challenge with trust. There's a couple of truisms about leadership and trust.
Leadership trust deposits, Phil, pretty much by their very nature are small. And so you need to be consistently making those deposits. You lead well in a variety of different areas, because in contradistinction to that, trust withdrawals are typically large. You have to make the hard decision. You have to downsize the team. You have to say no to a client that's a strong revenue client. You have to walk away from a real estate transaction, and it feels like a big thing. So leaders need to recognize oftentimes the difference is in the little things. I was talking with one of the managers underneath me a couple of weeks ago. One of the truisms that I work at investing in these retail swim school managers is the big things are revealed in the little things. It's those little trust drips. Deposit, because a withdrawal is coming. It just, by the very nature of life in the 2020s, withdrawals are coming.
Yep. And honestly, I think about like the deposits in the bank account, right? Before, and you can think about that with your employees. You can think about your family, with your spouse, with your kids. There's so many areas but what I haven't thought about is the magnitude of those. The deposits are small, but the withdrawals are large, and they're inevitable too. They're going to happen. Yeah. But having enough consistency of the small deposits, I think, is so important.
Well, so you said it's personal as well as professional. I'm out of town this weekend. My wife's birthday is tomorrow. I took her out to dinner the other night, but I'm gone. And so we've got a whole bunch of friends from our CrossFit gym and our church and just neighborhood friends. And she's going to get probably 20 phone calls tomorrow, people that are just going to call and leave a happy birthday song on her voicemail, because I've been putting it all together. And she doesn't know it's coming, but she's going to get all of these messages. Fortunately, you're not going to publish this podcast immediately, so she won't be able to hear about it ahead of time. But it was just one of those things where I'm arranging it on my iPad and typing all of these text messages. Hey, it's Lynn's birthday. Can you make sure you just call and sing for her? And so it's these tiny little things. She's going to call me tomorrow night and say, Andy, you were so thoughtful. And I'm gone for her birthday. But it's those little deposits that make big payoffs, right?
The title, Relationship Advice from Dr. Andy. I love it. That's good stuff. But it does illustrate the point. So those are the good things, right? And just your 4 leadership necessities. But you've coached a lot of small businesses, corporations, leaders, business leaders. There's also gaps, right? You talked about the bad leaders, but like, what are the most common things that our listeners, that are small business owners and leaders, that they're probably experiencing that you see commonly, and what can they do about those?
Well, I think one of the challenges in our economy today is this whole area of competence, helping your team excel in an environment where high staff turnover, employees, they live in a world that is rich in opportunities. So it feels like I don't need to invest here. I'll just move someplace else. And so managers who are working at becoming high performing leaders, they are finding ways to invest in their people. They're sending them to conferences. They're giving them the training they need. They're tying them into online resources. They're giving them mentors. They're helping them grow in their job, realizing, Phil, that, man, I get somebody really well trained. They might find a job someplace else because I've helped them upskill themselves. And I would say that's the risk of good leadership, because the flip side of that is you don't train them, so they remain incompetent, and you're stuck with them and their incompetency. So I think one of the challenges is we don't live in a world anymore like our parents or grandparents did, where there were corporate people that showed up and stayed for 40 years. You're going to help somebody grow, and you're going to lose them.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of effective leadership. You're not really going to lose them from your sphere of influence, but you may lose their ability to contribute to your company's bottom line.
And I would say that if you have what I would say, there's a limiting mindset around this and a growth mindset around it. If you have the limiting mindset where you're worried about spending the time on somebody because they'll leave, first of all, if they stay, they're not going to be as good. And second of all, they're more likely to leave because people want growth. Your employees want to grow. They want to get better. Growth is a drug. Like they want to get better at what they're doing at life. Yeah. So you're feeding that to them. And look, if they leave because of it, understand why and what you could have done about it, but support them, right? I mean, have that abundance mindset and know that if you do it the right way, if people leave because you're doing everything right for them, but they're ready for the next step, guess what? You're going to have 10 people in line that want to work for you at your company because of it. So just try to stay away from the limiting mindset and try to have the growth mindset around it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you and I both know that's true, and yet it's still painful. All of a sudden, I've got a big hole. Somebody that was a heavy lifter for me is gone, and I got to backfill that spot, and it's hard to find good people. And that's the reality of it. If you're in a big corporation, maybe not so much, but a lot of your listeners are small business owners and leaders, and that one spot that I just made him or her so smart that she got recruited by somebody else, I got to backfill, and it's just going to be painful. And that's, that's again why I said 10 minutes ago, leaders need to recognize they're at the bottom. They're not at the top. It's leadership. Leadership is expensive.
What about, so your ebook, 3 Imperative Leadership Conversations, tell me more about that. And if you don't do the spoiler, whatever, tell me as much as you want. It's
just a simple little ebook. My business coach a couple years ago was just saying, Andy, you've got such good stuff to say. You just need to make it available widely. And so I pulled together a little ebook. Phil, I think one of the things that differentiates managers from high-performing leaders is leaders know that they need to hold hard conversations. In fact, I will maintain one of the outside definitions, somebody looking in, if that person's having easy conversations, they're a manager. If they're having hard conversations, they're on their way to becoming a leader. And so the first imperative leadership conversation is the ability to hold a hard conversation. Somebody that's missed the mark, somebody that's been a disappointment, somebody that hasn't done what they needed to do. Do you lean in and hard conversation is not a harsh conversation necessarily, but it is a hard conversation. And so I did some research a number of years ago for a client asking me, how do we hold a hard conversation? And truth of the matter is, Phil, there's 13 best practices. I wish there was 3 because there always should be 3, but there's 13 things like don't die on any small ills. Sometimes you need a witness. Separate the difference between style and effectiveness. And so the first imperative leadership conversation is how to hold a conversation. And I talk about the 13 best practices, and then there's a worksheet on how to prepare for a hard conversation. The second leadership conversation is the developmental coaching conversation, where I'm not just helping Andy get better at this job, I'm helping Andy grow over the next 18 months. And so we're talking about skills and behaviors and mindset. Am I taking a step back and asking the bigger picture questions? And so the second part of the 3 imperative leadership conversations is how do you hold a developmental coaching conversation? And once again, there's a worksheet in there to prepare for a developmental coaching conversation. And then the third one, Phil, and I even sense it in our brief acquaintance here in the twinkle in your eye, every leader needs to recognize, even if they're a frontline manager, they're still the CEO for their team, and that means Chief Encouragement Officer. Leaders should always see the cup half full rather than half empty. How do you affirm the people underneath you? How do you celebrate the wins, even when they may be small or they may be few? And so we talk about the threefold affirmation conversation as the third imperative leadership conversation. And in fact, my team of managers for our swim schools, they just see me as the chief optimistic officer, and I'm always celebrating successes. Truth of the matter is, as I sit with you this morning right now, 2 of our 5 schools are underperforming. They're not hitting their customer service scores. They're not hitting their enrollment scores. Staffing is a challenge. And I'm having to look pretty hard at, so what can we celebrate? Because everybody needs a win. What are the 3? And so we talk about the threefold affirmation conversation. Three conversations every leader is purposeful about: hard conversation, development conversation, affirmation conversation.
Yeah. First of all, I think the fact that you have these schools too, like the other thing I didn't think about earlier, but you're teaching and coaching on leadership, but you have to do it. Like, and I wonder how much. Yeah. I wonder how much of your message over the course of time, because you were teaching before you started the schools, how did your message change? Yeah. I'll come back to the three imperative leadership conversations, but how did your message change because of what you've learned as having to do it?
Oh, Phil, I would say it brought it to life. I'm now telling real stories, right? The hard conversation I had to have with a manager a couple of weeks ago about the big things revealed in the little things. This is a real conversation. This is no longer theory, right? This is, I dismissed one of our senior managers less than a month ago because of toxic personality stuff. Truth of the matter is, she probably should not have been with us for a number of years. I kept extending grace, which is something that I think every leader should practice, but it impacted the other team members. These are my real stories at this point. And the truth of the matter is, Phil, I think I've learned more from failing at my attempts at leadership with these managers and trying to learn the lessons of, all right, what does it look like when I do it right instead of wrong? So my wife has pointed out to me any number of times, Andy, part of the whole thing about these retail businesses, this $5 million business we've grown, is it's just made your voice look more authentic. And I think she's right.
It brings credibility, and it brings, just again, as you said, it brought it to life, as you said, which I like a lot. And I think we have to combine, as leaders, we have to combine theory and action. And if we're just acting and learning without any theory behind it, that's probably a dangerous place to be. But if we're just learning but not putting anything into practice and not learning from lessons and failures that we're doing, I think that's a challenge too. The other thing I wanted to say is, I think it's in the book, How to Have Confidence and Power in Dealing with People, but Chief Encouragement Officer, what people want, they want acceptance, approval, appreciation, affirmation. Like, they need that. They need it. They need that affirmation so much. So a lot there, and I encourage people to check out the ebook as well. Or were you going to add something there?
Nope, I just echo what you said.
Yeah. Well, again, just thinking about, if you want the theory, check out Dr. Andy's book, but then also apply it and work through it, use the worksheets. And it sounds like your book is a little bit of both. It's theory, but it's also, hey, use this as application too. Yeah,
exactly. And they can get that at leadershipmaterials.com. They just go to leadershipmaterials.com and they can download that free ebook. The other interesting thing, Phil, I've written a couple of books, and this whole balance between theory and practice that you talked about, the little Amazon bestseller that I've written is called The Golden Principles: Life and Leadership Lessons from a Rescued Dog. My wife and I have been rescuing dogs since 4 years into our marriage, and just the practicality of, I realized a number of years ago, some of the best leadership insights I gained were not from my theory. They were not just from reading Harvard Business Review or my dissertation studies. I recognized if you want to train a dog, a lot of times a good yes is so much better than a harsh no. And getting down to their level and helping peers train them. And so I realized these aren't just dog training lessons. This is a good thing for managers to recognize as well. And so I had a publisher who said, you got any other stories like that? And I said, man, I think most of my good leadership lessons are tied to these dogs. And a year later, the Golden Principles came out. And it's that combination that you talked about, Phil, where, I do read the Harvard Business Review and a bunch of magazines like that. So I'm staying up with like current thinking and research and trends. But then I'm in the trenches. And so I can take the Harvard leadership, Harvard Business Review article on strategy and leadership and the 7 principles that were in their most recent edition. And I could say, yeah, here's how it works in your business. So I led a strategic planning session a couple of weeks ago for a privately held company in Texas, and it was their annual strategy session. They're not reading Harvard Business Review. It's a privately held business. They got their heads down. They're just trying to fight the fight every day. But I was able to some outside perspective and say, hey, make sure you take a step back and you think about the impact of AI on your business, and you think about changing market demands, and you think about this and you think about that. And I'd like to think that the best blend that guys like you and me can bring is that bigger picture perspective, but also the practicality of being in the trenches.
Yep. I agree 100%. How would you describe, like, if you were to describe your leadership style, how would you describe that?
Boy, it's hard to self-reflect on that. I want other people to be better for the time they spent with me, and I really do believe if they are better for the time they've spent with me, the business that I have them working for is going to be better. My privately held little business will be more profitable because they're growing as a person and as a leader. So I want it to be about them and not me as much as possible. I think if you and I do a good job as leaders, at times we can be invisible. Other people are getting to celebrate their successes, and nobody really knows the reason she made it, the reason he did that, the reason they won that award is because you and I were in the background dialing the dials and making the suggestions and holding the accountability. So part of it is, in some respects, some of the best leaders are invisible, right? Because they're more about their other people. And then the other thing I would say is this whole 15-year journey that I never intended to do 15 years ago has helped to teach me that doing the hard thing is oftentimes the right answer for leaders. It's the the blessing of the loss that you talked about. It's leaning into the hard conversation that I mentioned. It's denying the easy path and pushing to the hard path. It's leaning into conflict instead of avoiding conflict. I think a lot of those things define leadership. I was a football coach while I was going to graduate school. I was working for an inner city school while I was going to school myself. I was under the leadership of a head coach, and he was moving me from coaching the offense to coaching the defense. And I'll never forget one of the lessons Coach Rod taught me is, Andy, when you're playing defense, if you want to know where the ball is, the other team is trying to fake you out. They're doing fake handoffs and pulling guards in the wrong direction. But if you want to know where the ball is, go toward the pressure. Tell your defense to always go whatever way they're pushing you against. That's where the ball is. Go toward the pressure. Well, that worked on the football field for Franklin High School in Portland, Oregon. That's also a life principle, isn't it, Phil?
Yeah.
Leaders need to lead into the hard things.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. I talk about difficult conversations. If you do that, and it sounds like even you had a situation recently, like you're not just you're going to be elevating that person that you're having the difficult conversation with, but the other team members around it, they're not going to know the details of that conversation. You're going to share that with them, but they're going to just recognize the change in the culture in that person, whatever that evolves into. But just embracing the hard things, I think, is so important. And I think there's something about doing hard things in general in business and in life that just creates that muscle of doing hard things and knowing that, okay, I can do these things and it'll turn out okay. So really appreciate that. And by the way, just better your answer to your leadership style. And I should have known this already, because you want people to be better for the time they spent. Goes back to the very first thing you said, which is you're about being a servant leader. And I really appreciate just the connection there, kind of trying to close the loop. I want you to step back and reflect, really think about what you've done, the leadership, the people you've impacted from a leadership perspective, but also the lives you've saved that you probably don't know about those lives that you saved, but you've inevitably saved a lot of lives. If you step back and reflect, how does what you do make you feel?
Yeah. I mean, the whole irony of it is I'm passionate about leadership development. I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles from leading workshops and conferences and coaching around the globe. And yet, to your point, Phil, when I get to heaven someday, I think the most important work that I may have ever done is starting these swim schools where little kids learn to swim so they don't drown. And we're saving lives that way. And it touches me deeply. Today, it's all hands off, Phil. As I said, I haven't been in the pool in years. I haven't taught a lesson, but my leadership has allowed 200,000 lessons to be done. There are kids and family where tragedy didn't occur. I mean, once again, I don't want to dwell on the sober side of it, but the CDC that monitors these things estimates for every recorded childhood drowning, there's 9 other families that are devastated by kids with brains that don't function anymore, near drownings that occur. The typical childhood drowning leads to a divorce if the parents are married. There's a whole bevy of horrible things that happen around that. I get to reverse that.
Yeah, I want to make sure people just understand this with young kids too. For just a 1 minute tangent, explain it more. I mean, our youngest is now. We're actually thinking about do we put in a pool, but our youngest is now just turned 5. So we kind of let's wait until she can swim.
Yeah.
But this can tell me more about this because it's mind blowing, really.
You're outside Dayton. There's actually Aqua Tots, a friend of mine that's got a couple of schools in the Dayton area. And this whole movement of indoor year-round child-friendly swim schools has grown in the last 15 years. It's become more of a nationwide trend. The franchise I'm a part of, Aqua Tots, is one of the largest networks of swim schools in the world, but there's others. There's a study out of Australia several years ago that documented when children learn to take swim lessons, actually they do better in school because they've learned the discipline of self-control. They're learning from their peers, breath control, counting to 4 before you put your head underwater, closing your mouth and opening your eyes. So there's developmental things that help kids be more successful really in other areas as well. And as I like to remember, good parents have their kids doing a bunch of different activities, gymnastics and t-ball and dance, and only one of those activities will save their lives, and that's swim lessons. So parents need to get their kids safe in the water. I'm not sure everybody needs to go to an indoor year-round child-friendly safe swim school like Aqua Tots, but every parent needs to make sure their kids know how to go over to Tommy's house where there's a backyard pool and have fun, or meet up with their friends whose folks have a pontoon boat and they go inner tubing. Kids need to learn how to swim.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to just talk through that and you can impact people not just through your school and what you're doing, but just getting that message out too can help people. So I appreciate that. Looking ahead, what do you think is going to be the most important key to just you being successful? Are you there? It's okay. We'll just chop this a little bit out.
Okay.
I don't
Sorry
know
about
if that was
that.
on my end, but we have a lot of good stuff here. So I'll just repeat that question. Maybe. Okay, let's wrap up. You're back. We'll just cut this out, and we'll try to get just a wrap up here. I'll just say thanks for coming.
I apologize. Lunch has been served at some special meeting. There's a bunch of people out in the lobby. I suspect a bunch of them just jumped on their iPhones and they.
That's okay. That's okay.
Up bandwidth. I'm sorry.
Andy, a lot of great stuff here. I appreciate it so much. We covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we talked about servant leadership. We talked about the 4 leadership necessities. We talked about how to have crucial or imperative leadership conversations and doing the hard things. So much value. I appreciate you coming on so much. Andy, how can people find out more about you?
Well, Andy and Neillie, if they connect up on LinkedIn or just Neillie Leadership, Neillie. My name is spelled distinctly enough, Mr. Moeller. But if they get it right, they'll find me. So neillieleadership.com. And there's a link up at the top of my website if somebody wants to jump on for 15 minutes and call. I'd be happy to visit with them. Love the work that you're doing, Phil. I've had a chance to listen to some of your podcasts, and I know you've got you just are saying a lot of good stuff and bringing good people on. Really, for those of us that are small business people, well, we need one another, and I appreciate the good work you're doing. Thanks for the privilege of being a part of it.
Well, I think that's important. I think network and association, having other people to rely on, is so important, and I think you're probably doing that. And don't be afraid to reach out to other people and get support too. That's part of just being a good leader, is surrounding yourself with other good leaders that you can learn from. So, Andy, bringing knowledge till the end. I appreciate it so much for coming on. Definitely check out Andy's website, his ebook. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Muller Real Estate, visit our website at www.mullerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.